Have you ever looked at your bank account just a few days after payday and wondered, where did all my money go? You worked hard. You woke up early. You gave your energy, your time, and your strength. Yet somehow, your wallet became empty long before the month was over. Now imagine this. What if your salary doubled tomorrow? Would your life really change? Or would your expenses simply grow until you found yourself waiting for payday once again? Today's story is about a young man who believed he had only one problem: his low salary. But he was about to discover something that would change his entire future. Stay until the end, because somewhere in this story, you might recognize yourself. The sun had not yet risen when the alarm rang inside a tiny rented room. Michael slowly opened his eyes. The room was barely large enough for a narrow bed, a wooden chair, and a small table with chipped paint. Rainwater stains covered the ceiling. Whenever heavy rain came, he placed buckets around the room to catch the leaking water. A rusty fan spun lazily above him, making more noise than wind. He sat on the edge of the bed and rubbed his tired eyes. Another day. Another shift. Another chance to earn money that never seemed to stay. After washing his face with cold water, he put on his faded supermarket uniform. The collar had begun to wear out. The shoes on his feet had already been repaired twice. He looked at himself in the cracked mirror. "I'm trying," he whispered. Then he picked up his backpack and began the 40-minute walk to work. The streets slowly came alive. Street vendors arranged fresh fruit. Children waited for school buses. Office workers hurried toward crowded transport stations. Everyone looked busy. Everyone seemed to be chasing something. Michael wondered if anyone else felt as trapped as he did. When he finally reached the supermarket, his manager was already waiting. "Morning, Michael." "Morning, sir." The delivery truck arrived early. Michael smiled politely. "I'll unload it." For the next several hours he carried heavy boxes, arranged shelves, checked prices, cleaned aisles, answered customers' questions, and smiled even when his feet ached. Some customers barely looked at him. Some complained about prices as though he controlled the entire economy. Others left shopping trolleys in the middle of the aisle for someone else to return. That someone was usually Michael. By lunchtime his back hurt. His shirt was soaked with sweat. But there were still 6 hours left before his shift ended. During lunch break, Michael sat beside 3 coworkers behind the supermarket. One of them sighed. "I swear," David laughed bitterly, "we're not working for money anymore." Another worker smiled. "We're just working to survive." Everyone laughed. The laughter lasted only a few seconds. Then silence returned. Because deep down, everyone knew it was true. At exactly 6 o'clock that evening, Michael clocked out. His legs felt heavy. Every step home seemed longer than the last. As he passed an electronics shop, a large television displayed luxury holiday advertisements. Beautiful beaches. Expensive hotels. Smiling families. For a moment he stopped walking. He couldn't remember the last time he had taken a holiday. Not because he didn't want one. Because he couldn't afford one. He smiled sadly and continued walking. 3 days later, payday arrived. The atmosphere inside the supermarket changed completely. People smiled more. Conversations became louder. Everyone checked their phones to confirm the salary had arrived. Michael looked at the notification. His account balance had increased. For a few wonderful moments, he felt rich. His phone vibrated. It was David. Tonight. Michael already knew what that meant. Another message arrived. Everyone's going. Don't be boring. Another. You deserve to enjoy yourself. Michael hesitated. He knew exactly what would happen. But he also knew how lonely his small room felt after work. Finally he replied. "I'm coming." That evening music filled the nightclub. Bright lights flashed across the room. People laughed. They danced. They ordered expensive food. Every few minutes another bill appeared on the table. Michael barely noticed. For one night, he didn't feel poor. He bought new trainers he didn't need. A designer jacket that cost nearly a week's wages. The latest wireless headphones because everyone else seemed to own them. When his friends suggested taking photos, he smiled confidently. The pictures looked perfect. Anyone scrolling through social media would believe he was living his best life. But social media never showed the bank balance. 5 days later, reality returned. Michael opened his wallet. 2 notes. A few coins. That was all. He opened the refrigerator. Half a loaf of bread. 1 egg. A bottle of water. Nothing else. He checked his mobile banking app. Almost empty. Again. Exactly like last month. Exactly like the month before. He sat quietly on the edge of his bed. How? He whispered. I worked every single day. So why am I always broke? No answer came. Only silence. The following evening, while walking home, the smell of grilled chicken drifted from a nearby restaurant. His stomach growled loudly. People inside laughed as steaming plates were placed on their tables. Families enjoyed dinner together. Couples celebrated birthdays. Friends shared meals. Michael reached into his pocket. He counted the money. Enough for bread. Not enough for dinner. He stood outside the restaurant for almost 30 seconds. Then quietly walked away. That night he ate dry bread with water. As he lay in bed, hunger made sleep impossible. He stared at the cracked ceiling. Maybe. He thought. This is just how life is. Maybe people like me never get ahead. It was the most dangerous thought he had ever believed. Weeks passed. Nothing changed. Every month followed the same routine. Work. Salary. Spending. Regret. Waiting for payday. It felt like running on a treadmill. Always moving. Never arriving. One Saturday evening, after another exhausting shift, Michael decided to take a different route home. Children played football in the street. Neighbors chatted outside their homes. The setting sun painted the sky orange. Everything seemed peaceful. Until he heard shouting. A crowd had gathered outside a small rented house. An angry landlord stood at the gate. A frightened father stood silently beside 2 worn-out suitcases. His wife held back tears. Their little daughter clung tightly to her mother's hand. The landlord's voice echoed down the street. I've waited long enough. You've had months. If you can't pay the rent, you can't stay here. The father lowered his head. Please. I just need a little more time. I've been working every day. I'll pay next month. The landlord shook his head. You always say next month. You work. But you never plan. Those 5 words struck Michael harder than anything he had ever heard. You work, but you never plan. He froze. The crowd slowly dispersed. The family quietly picked up their bags. Their little girl looked back at the only home she had ever known. Michael felt something tighten inside his chest. Then a frightening thought entered his mind. One day, that could be me. For the first time in his life, Michael stopped blaming his salary and started questioning his choices. That night, Michael couldn't sleep. The image of the frightened family standing outside their rented home replayed over and over in his mind. He could still hear the landlord's words. You work, but you never plan. He turned onto his side. Then onto his back. The room was silent except for the slow hum of the old ceiling fan. For years, Michael had blamed his salary. He blamed inflation. He blamed the economy. He blamed his employer. He blamed bad luck. But for the first time, he wondered if the biggest obstacle wasn't outside his life. Maybe it was inside his habits. As the first rays of sunlight entered through the small window, Michael made a decision. Today would be different. Instead of sleeping late on his day off, he walked into the town for the first time without any intention of spending money. He passed cafes filled with people enjoying breakfast. He passed clothing stores displaying expensive fashion. He passed mobile phone shops advertising the newest devices. Normally, these places tempted him. Today, he kept walking. At the end of the street stood an old brick building he had passed hundreds of times but had never entered. The public library. Its wooden doors looked worn with age. The sign above the entrance had faded from years of sunlight. Michael hesitated. "What could a library possibly teach me about money?" he whispered. Still, he stepped inside. The air smelled of old books and polished wood. It was quiet. So quiet that he could hear the turning of pages. An elderly librarian looked up and smiled warmly. "Good morning." Michael smiled awkwardly. "I've never been here before." "Everyone has a first visit," she replied kindly. "What are you looking for?" Michael thought for a moment. Then answered honestly. "I want to understand why I'm always broke." The librarian didn't laugh. Instead, she nodded as if she had heard that question many times before. She walked slowly between tall shelves until she stopped in front of a section labeled Personal Finance. She pulled out several books. One title immediately caught Michael's attention. Small Income, Big Future. The cover showed a tiny seed growing into a huge tree. For some reason, it felt personal. Michael borrowed the book and hurried home. He made himself a simple cup of tea. Then opened the first page. The opening sentence immediately caught his attention. Wealth rarely begins with a larger income. It usually begins with better decisions. Michael read it again. Then again. He leaned back in his chair. So, it's not only about earning more. He continued reading. The author explained something Michael had never considered. Most people, the book said, increase their lifestyle every time their income increases. They earn more. They spend more. They buy bigger televisions. More expensive clothes. Better phones. Nicer cars. Yet they still end each month with nothing. The problem wasn't income. It was direction. Money without a plan disappears. Money with a purpose grows. Michael slowly closed the book. No teacher had ever explained money this way. No one at school had taught him how to manage earnings. He realized he had spent years learning how to work, but never learned how to keep what he earned. When payday arrived 2 weeks later, his phone buzzed with familiar messages. David wrote first. "Same place tonight." Another friend sent a photo of the nightclub. "Big party tonight." Someone else added, "You only live once." Michael looked at the messages for several seconds. His fingers hovered over the keyboard. Normally, he would already be getting ready. Instead he typed, "Sorry, not tonight." Within seconds the replies arrived. "What? Are you ill? Has someone kidnapped you?" Michael laughed. Then placed the phone face down on the table. For the first time in years, he stayed home on payday. He cooked rice, vegetables, and grilled chicken. Nothing fancy. Nothing expensive. But something strange happened. The meal tasted better than many expensive dinners he had bought before. Because he wasn't eating guilt with it. After dinner, he took out an old notebook. On the first page he wrote one sentence. "Every pound must have a job before I spend it." He divided the page into columns. Rent. Food. Transport. Savings. Emergency fund. Learning. Then, at the bottom, entertainment. For the first time, entertainment wasn't first. It was last. Michael smiled. It looked simple. But it felt powerful. The next morning, he went to work as usual. Nothing had changed. The supermarket was still busy. Customers still complained. Boxes were still heavy. His salary was still exactly the same. Yet something inside him felt different. During lunch break, while everyone else scrolled through social media, Michael opened his notebook. He calculated how much money he had spent during the previous month. The numbers shocked him. Coffee. Takeaways. Clothes. Taxi rides. Subscriptions he barely used. Tiny purchases he never thought about. Individually they looked harmless. Together, they were swallowing his future. David noticed the notebook. "What are you writing?" "My spending." David laughed. "You've become an accountant." The others laughed too. Michael smiled calmly. "No. I'm becoming responsible." That weekend, temptation arrived again. A huge shopping center announced a massive sale. Posters everywhere shouted, 70% off. Michael walked inside just to look. Rows of trainers lined the shelves. One pair immediately caught his eye. They looked perfect. Stylish. Modern. Exactly the kind his friends would admire. He tried them on. They fit perfectly. He imagined posting a photo online. Hundreds of likes. Compliments. For a moment, he almost reached for his bank card. Then, another image appeared in his mind. The little girl standing beside two suitcases. The frightened look on her face. The landlord shouting, "You work, but you never plan." Michael slowly removed the trainers, placed them carefully back on the shelf, and walked away. Outside the shopping center, he felt something unexpected. Not disappointment. Freedom. For the first time, he had defeated an impulse instead of letting it defeat him. That evening he returned to his room. He opened the notebook. Instead of writing an expense, he wrote something else. "Today I proved that discipline is stronger than temptation." He smiled. The sentence wasn't about money. It was about the person he was becoming. Small victories. Small decisions. Small habits. Maybe they really could change a life. As weeks turned into months, Michael created a routine. He woke 30 minutes earlier every morning. He read 10 pages of a book before work. He packed lunch instead of buying it. He walked instead of paying for taxis whenever possible. He tracked every pound he spent. Some days were easy. Others were incredibly difficult. There were moments he wanted to quit. Moments he wanted to tell himself, "One purchase won't matter." But he remembered another sentence from the book. Success isn't built by one big decision. It's built by thousands of small ones. Michael repeated those words every time temptation appeared. Slowly. Without noticing. His habits were changing. And habits have a remarkable way of changing destinies. One evening, as he counted the money left in his account, something unbelievable happened. For the first time since he started working, the month was almost over. And he still had money left. It wasn't much. But it wasn't zero. Michael stared at the screen in disbelief. Then smiled. It wasn't the amount that made him happy. It was the proof. The proof that change was possible. He whispered quietly, "I'm finally moving forward." But Michael had no idea. The greatest challenge of his journey was still waiting for him. Success rarely announces its arrival with applause. More often, it begins with quiet decisions that no one notices. For Michael, those quiet decisions became his daily routine. Every morning, before the sun painted the sky with shades of gold, his alarm rang at 5:30. The temptation to stay in bed was always there. His body still ached from lifting heavy boxes at the supermarket. His feet still felt sore from standing all day. But each morning, he remembered a promise he had made to himself. If my future is going to change, my mornings must change first. He climbed out of bed, folded his blanket neatly, stretched for a few minutes, and opened a book instead of his phone. 10 pages. Every single day. Some mornings he understood everything he read. Other mornings his mind wandered. Still, he never skipped those 10 pages. Because he had learned something important. Consistency beats intensity. One Monday afternoon, during lunch break, David sat beside him with a wide grin. "You've become boring," David joked. Michael looked up from his notebook. "Boring? You never come out with us anymore. You never buy new clothes. You don't even order takeaway. Another colleague joined the conversation. I heard you're saving every penny. Michael smiled. I'm saving for freedom. The men laughed loudly. Freedom? David asked. You earn the same salary as we do. What freedom are you talking about? Michael closed his notebook. The freedom to stop worrying every time my phone rings. The freedom to pay my bills without panic. The freedom to make choices instead of excuses. His friends exchanged amused glances. David shook his head. Life is short. You should enjoy it. Michael nodded politely. I agree. But I don't want to enjoy one weekend and suffer for the next 3. The conversation ended there. But inside Michael's heart, a quiet confidence had begun to grow. Several months passed. One rainy evening, as Michael returned home, he found his landlord waiting outside the building. His stomach tightened. The landlord handed him an envelope. The rent will increase next month. Michael opened the letter. His monthly rent had gone up by almost 15%. A few months earlier, this news would have devastated him. He would have borrowed money, used a credit card, skipped meals, or simply hoped for a miracle. Instead, he walked upstairs, opened his notebook, and reviewed his budget. His emergency fund wasn't large, but it existed. For the first time in his life, an unexpected expense didn't become a financial disaster. He smiled quietly. This, he whispered, is why planning matters. A week later, another challenge arrived. Michael's mother called. Her voice sounded weak. My washing machine has broken. I've been washing clothes by hand. The repair costs more than I can afford. Michael closed his eyes. He loved his mother deeply. She had worked hard all her life to raise him after his father passed away. Without hesitation, he transferred the money she needed. Later that evening, he looked at his savings account. It had dropped significantly. For a brief moment, disappointment crept into his thoughts. Then he smiled. Money had finally become what it was meant to be. Not something to impress strangers, but something that could help the people he loved. That realization made every sacrifice worthwhile. The seasons changed. Summer faded into autumn. Autumn gave way to winter. Michael continued working at the supermarket. His salary remained exactly the same. But something else had changed. His confidence. Customers began recognizing him. Managers noticed his reliability. He was never late. Never careless. Never complained. One afternoon, the store manager called him into the office. Michael knocked softly. You wanted to see me, sir? The manager smiled. Sit down. Michael felt nervous. Had he made a mistake? Instead, the manager folded his hands. I've been watching your work for nearly a year. You've become one of the most dependable people on this team. Michael smiled modestly. Thank you. We'd like to promote you to shift supervisor. For a moment, Michael couldn't speak. The promotion wasn't dramatic. The salary increase wasn't huge. But it was the first time in years that his effort had been recognized. As he left the office, he whispered to himself, small improvements really do lead somewhere. That evening, David congratulated him. You're buying dinner tonight? Michael laughed. Maybe not dinner. But I can buy everyone coffee. David frowned. You just got a pay rise. Why are you still so careful? Michael answered calmly. Because I don't want a bigger salary to create bigger problems. I want it to create a bigger future. David didn't fully understand. But years later, he would remember those words. Despite the promotion, life didn't suddenly become easy. One cold winter morning, the supermarket announced that several employees would lose their jobs due to falling sales. Fear spread through the staff room. People whispered. Some cried. Others immediately started searching for new jobs online. Michael felt anxious too. He wasn't immune to fear. But unlike before, he wasn't completely helpless. If he lost his job tomorrow, he had savings. Not enough to retire. but enough to survive for several months while looking for another opportunity. That small financial cushion gave him something priceless: peace of mind. Fortunately, his name wasn't on the redundancy list. When the announcement ended, he looked around the room. Many talented people were leaving. Not because they lacked ability, but because life can change without warning. Walking home that evening, Michael made another promise: I will never rely on only one source of income. That sentence refused to leave his mind. One income. One employer. One salary. It suddenly felt risky. That weekend, he visited the library again. This time he searched for books about small businesses. Hours passed as he read stories about ordinary people who started with almost nothing. Some sold homemade bread. Others repaired bicycles. Some tutored children after work. Many failed several times before succeeding. But one lesson appeared in every story: start before you feel ready. Michael wrote those words in his notebook. Then he asked himself a difficult question: what skill do I already have? He thought about it for days. He wasn't an engineer. He wasn't a lawyer. He wasn't a programmer. Then one evening, while helping an elderly neighbor assemble a wardrobe, she smiled and said, "You're very good with your hands." That sentence sparked an idea. Michael had always enjoyed repairing simple household furniture. Shelves. Tables. Cabinets. Chairs. Perhaps people would pay for that. He didn't know. But for the first time, he wasn't dreaming about becoming rich overnight. He was thinking about building something. Slowly. Patiently. One customer at a time. As he closed his notebook that night, he wrote one final sentence across the bottom of the page: my salary pays my bills. My skills will build my future. He had no idea that this small idea, written in an ordinary notebook, would one day transform his life beyond anything he had ever imagined. Michael stared at the words he had written in his notebook. My salary pays my bills. My skills will build my future. He read the sentence again. For years, he had dreamed about becoming successful. But dreaming had never changed anything. Action did. The following Saturday, instead of sleeping late, he walked through the local market carrying a small backpack filled with basic tools. A hammer. A screwdriver set. A tape measure. A drill he had bought secondhand after saving for months. It wasn't much. But it was enough to begin. His first stop was a small community notice board outside a grocery shop. Dozens of handwritten advertisements covered it. House cleaning. Math tutoring. Garden maintenance. Dog walking. Michael took a deep breath and pinned up his own notice. Furniture repairs. Reliable. Affordable. Honest service. Shelves, tables, chairs, wardrobes, and small home repairs. Call Michael. He stepped back and looked at it. It wasn't a famous business. It wasn't a grand opening. It was simply a beginning. Days passed. Nothing happened. His phone remained silent. Every few hours he checked it. No missed calls. No messages. A week passed. Still nothing. For a moment, doubt returned. Maybe nobody needs my help. Maybe I'm wasting my time. Then he remembered something he had read. Seeds disappear beneath the soil long before anyone sees the tree. So he left the advertisement exactly where it was. 10 days later. His phone rang. Unknown number. Michael answered immediately. Hello. A gentle elderly voice replied. My kitchen cupboard door has fallen off. I saw your advertisement. Can you fix it? Michael almost shouted with excitement. Instead he calmly replied. Yes, of course. When he arrived at the woman's house, she apologized. I'm afraid I can't pay very much. Michael smiled warmly. Let's fix it first. The repair took less than an hour. When he finished, the cupboard looked almost new. The woman smiled. You've done wonderful work. She handed him a small envelope. Inside was £25. It wasn't a fortune. But as Michael walked home holding that envelope, it felt like the most valuable money he had ever earned. Not because of the amount. Because he had earned it through something he had created himself. For the first time, money had come from more than his salary. That evening he placed the £25 into a separate envelope. He wrote across the front, "Business Fund." He refused to spend it. Every pound would help the business grow. Slowly, word began to spread. One customer recommended him to a neighbor. The neighbor recommended him to a cousin. A local cafe asked him to repair wooden chairs. A teacher hired him to assemble bookshelves. The jobs were small, but each one taught him something. How to speak professionally. How to arrive on time. How to earn trust. Not everything went smoothly. One afternoon Michael accidentally scratched a customer's dining table. His heart sank. He expected shouting. Instead, he apologized sincerely. "I made a mistake. I'll repair it at no extra cost." The customer watched him quietly. "You admitted your mistake. Most people make excuses." That customer later recommended Michael to 3 other families. He learned an important lesson. Honesty creates opportunities that perfection never can. Months passed. Michael followed a simple routine. Monday to Friday. Supermarket. Evenings. Reading books. Weekends. Furniture repairs. There were days he felt exhausted. Sometimes he returned home after 10 o'clock at night. His hands were rough. His shoulders ached. His clothes smelled of sawdust. But something inside him felt alive. Every weekend brought him one step closer to the future he imagined. One rainy evening David visited his room. He looked around in surprise. The room hadn't become luxurious. The old fan was still there. The furniture was still simple. But something had changed. Michael had bought a proper desk. Books filled the shelves. A whiteboard hung on the wall covered with goals. Savings target. Business customers. Emergency fund. Investment plan. David laughed. "You've turned your room into an office." Michael smiled. "It's becoming the headquarters of my future." David shook his head. "You work all week. Then you work weekends. When do you enjoy life?" Michael walked to the window. Outside, heavy rain fell onto the streets. "I enjoy building something that will still matter 10 years from now." David didn't answer. For the first time, he wasn't laughing anymore. As Michael's confidence grew, so did his curiosity. He began listening to free business podcasts while walking to work. He watched educational videos instead of endless entertainment. Every month he bought one new book. He treated knowledge like an investment rather than an expense. One sentence stayed with him forever. "Your income usually grows to the level of your knowledge and your character." Michael wrote it in bold letters across his notebook. Nearly 2 years had passed since the day he walked into the library. One evening he counted his savings. He stared at the total in disbelief. It was more money than he had ever owned in his life. Not millions. Not even tens of thousands. But enough to make a meaningful decision. He began searching property listings. Most houses were far beyond his budget. Still, one advert caught his attention. A tiny, neglected cottage on the edge of town. The roof needed repairs. The garden was overgrown. The paint was peeling. Most buyers ignored it. Michael saw something different. Potential. He met the estate agent the following Saturday. The woman unlocked the front door. Dust covered the floors. Broken cupboards leaned against the walls. Rain had damaged part of the ceiling. The estate agent apologized. "I'm afraid it's in poor condition." Michael smiled. "I know." As he walked through each room, memories flooded back. His own rented room. The leaking roof. The cold nights. The fear of never owning anything. He stood silently in the empty living room. "I don't need perfection," he whispered. "I need a beginning." Using years of careful savings and a modest mortgage he could comfortably afford, Michael bought the little cottage. His friends were shocked. "You bought that? It looks ready to collapse." Michael laughed. "So did my finances once." Every evening after work, he repaired the cottage himself. He painted walls, replaced shelves, fixed doors, installed lights, planted flowers outside. Slowly, week by week, the neglected building transformed into a warm little home. Neighbors began stopping to watch. One elderly man smiled. "You've brought this place back to life." Michael replied quietly, "No. It brought me back to life." Months later, the renovated cottage was ready. Instead of selling it immediately for a quick profit, Michael made another decision. He rented it to a young family at a fair price. As he handed over the keys, he noticed the little boy smiling with excitement. The sight reminded him of the frightened family he had watched years ago standing beside their suitcases. Michael silently made himself a promise. "If I ever become wealthy, I will never forget what it feels like to struggle." That promise would one day define not only his success, but his character. 5 years passed. The little cottage Michael had renovated was no longer just a house. It was the first brick in a dream that once seemed impossible. Every month, the rent arrived on time. Instead of spending it, Michael saved most of it. His supermarket salary still covered his daily expenses. His rental income quietly built his future. For the first time in his life, money was working for him, not the other way around. Michael never forgot the habits that had changed everything. He still woke before sunrise. He still made his bed. He still read at least 10 pages every morning. He still carried a homemade lunch to work. His clothes were simple. His car was old but reliable. People often assumed he earned very little. They had no idea that he no longer felt trapped by money. He had discovered something far more valuable than a larger paycheck. He had found peace. One afternoon, as Michael arranged products on a supermarket shelf, the store manager approached him. "Can we talk in my office?" Michael followed him. The manager smiled warmly. "I've watched your journey for years. You've become one of the best supervisors this company has ever had." He paused. "I also heard about your property business." Michael nodded modestly. "I've been fortunate." The manager shook his head. "No. You've been disciplined." Then he offered Michael a senior management position. The salary was nearly double what he had earned when he first joined the supermarket. Years earlier, that offer would have felt like the answer to every problem. Now, Michael smiled. He accepted the promotion. Not because he desperately needed the money, but because he genuinely enjoyed helping people grow. For the first time, work was no longer just survival. It had become purpose. A few months later, David unexpectedly visited Michael's office. He looked older, more tired. His smile had faded. After sitting quietly for several moments, he finally spoke. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course." David looked down at the floor. "I earn more than I did 5 years ago. I've changed jobs twice. My salary keeps increasing. But I'm still broke." Michael remained silent. David continued. "I've got loans, credit cards, car payments. I don't know where my money goes." Tears filled his eyes. "I thought earning more would fix everything." Michael recognized those words immediately. Because years ago, he had believed exactly the same thing. Without judging his friend, Michael opened an old drawer. Inside lay a worn notebook with faded edges. The very notebook where he had written every expense, every goal, and every lesson. He placed it gently on the desk. "This notebook changed my life." David looked confused. "It's just a notebook." Michael smiled. "So was my salary. What mattered was what I chose to do with it." For the next 2 hours, Michael shared everything he had learned. Budgeting. Saving first. living below his means, building skills, investing patiently, avoiding unnecessary debt. David listened without interrupting. When he finally stood to leave, he hugged Michael tightly. "Thank you. I wish someone had taught me this years ago." Michael smiled. "So do I." Over the following years, Michael purchased another small property. Then another. He never rushed. He never borrowed more than he could comfortably repay. He ignored people promising instant riches. Whenever someone suggested risky investments with unbelievable returns, he politely declined. "I'd rather become wealthy slowly than lose everything quickly." His patience became his greatest investment. One Sunday afternoon, Michael drove past the same street where years earlier he had witnessed a family being evicted. He slowed the car. The neighborhood looked different now. Children laughed outside. Fresh flowers decorated small gardens. Then he noticed something familiar. An elderly man sat on a bench nearby. It was the former landlord. Age had softened his face. Michael parked the car and walked over. The old man looked at him carefully. "Haven't we met before?" Michael smiled. "You probably don't remember me. I once watched you ask a family to leave one of your rental houses." The landlord sighed deeply. "I remember that day. I wasn't proud of it. I had debts myself. I felt trapped." Michael nodded. "I understand." The old man looked at him curiously. "What do you do now?" Michael smiled gently. "I own a few rental properties." The landlord laughed. "Then you've probably had difficult tenants too." Michael looked toward the street. "Yes. But whenever I can, I choose compassion before anger." The old man lowered his head. "I wish I had learned that sooner." Michael shook his hand before leaving. Some lessons arrive too late. Others arrive exactly when we need them. The greatest moment of Michael's life came on a quiet autumn afternoon. He drove to his mother's house. Without saying a word, he handed her a small envelope. Inside was a set of house keys. She looked confused. "What are these?" Michael smiled. "Come with me." They drove across town until they stopped in front of a beautiful little home surrounded by flowers. His mother stared silently. Michael placed the keys in her hand. "This house is yours." Tears filled her eyes instantly. She looked at her son in disbelief. "You bought this for me?" Michael nodded. "You spent your life giving me everything you could. Now it's my turn." His mother began crying. She hugged him tightly. "I used to worry every night that your salary would never be enough." Michael smiled through tears. "My salary wasn't enough. But my habits became enough." They stood together on the front porch without speaking. Sometimes love needs no words. Years later, Michael was invited to speak at a local community center. The audience was filled with young workers, students, and families. Many were struggling just as he once had. Michael walked onto the stage carrying only one thing. The same old notebook. He held it up. This notebook contains no secrets. No magic formula. No lottery numbers. It contains small decisions. The decisions that slowly changed an ordinary life. He looked around the room. Then spoke the words he hoped everyone would remember. "People often ask me, what was the turning point? They expect me to talk about buying property, or getting promoted, or earning more money. But they are always surprised by my answer. The turning point happened long before any of those things. It happened the day I stopped blaming my salary and started taking responsibility for my choices." The room fell completely silent. Michael smiled warmly. "If you only remember one sentence today, remember this. Your income may start your journey, but your habits decide where it ends." So now, let me ask you one final question. When your next paycheck arrives, will it disappear without a plan? Or will it become the first brick in the future you've always dreamed of building? The decision won't be made by your employer. It won't be made by the economy. And it won't be made by luck. It will be made by the choices you make after your money reaches your hands. Because wealth isn't built in a single month. It is built one wise decision at a time. One disciplined habit at a time. One ordinary day at a time. And perhaps, just like Michael, your greatest breakthrough isn't waiting for a bigger salary. It's waiting for a better plan.